Every afternoon as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars. There were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. One day, the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. After the 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own castle.
Cornish, from the area of Cornwall, a county in England in the British Isles. The Cornish people live in the southwest portion of England.
When he arrived, he saw the children playing in his garden.
My own garden is my own garden. Anyone can understand that. And I will allow nobody to play in it but myself.
So he built a high wall all round it and put up a notice board.
Trespassers will be prosecuted.
He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander round the high wall when their lessons were over, and talk about the beautiful garden inside. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board, It was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went back to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden, and he blew the chimney pots down. So the hail came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates. Then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in gray, and his breath was like ice.
I cannot understand why spring is so late in coming.
He sat at the window and looked out at his cold, white garden.
I hope there will be a change in the weather.
But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees.
Hail. Small chunks of ice. During a hailstorm, you can see small round pieces of ice hitting the ground.
One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world.
Linnet, a small brown bird. A linnet is a different kind of bird than a robin or a sparrow.
Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. And he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms, and they were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene. Only in one corner, it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden. And in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all round it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could. But the boy was too tiny. And the giant's heart melted as he looked out.
How selfish I have been. Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever.
He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it. And the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring.
It is your garden now, little children.
And he took his great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening when they came to bid the giant goodbye, he asked,
But where is your little companion, the boy I put into the tree?
The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him.
You must tell him to be sure and come here tomorrow.
But the children said that they did not know where he lived and had never seen him before, and the giant felt very sad. Every afternoon, when school was over, the children came and played with the giant. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his little friend and often spoke of him. But the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about any more, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children play at their games and admired his garden. One winter, he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He did not hate the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep, and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly, he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked and looked. It certainly was a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden, and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in a great joy, and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came near to the child.
I came back because of your love,
Said the child, and a great light shone all around him.
Who are you?
Said the giant. And a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him,
You let me play in your garden long ago. Today you may come to my garden, which is in paradise.
and the giant lay down under his favorite tree and fell asleep and dreamed of paradise.
In addition to the careful planting of flowers, shrubs, and trees, many gardeners made patterns on the ground out of flowers. Sometimes, hedges and shrubs were cut into animal or geometrical shapes. This is called topiary. It takes many years to trim and shape a hedge so that it has a smooth outline. Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin, Ireland on October the 16th, 1854. He always wanted to be well known. He made a name for himself by writing stories, plays, and poems, and reviewing art. Wilde dressed in outrageous clothing and said shocking things to make people notice him. The fairy tales of Oscar Wilde were first published in 1889.
Giants are people who have grown very tall. We grow because the cells in our bones and bone marrow receive chemical signals that cause them to change. These signals come from the brain, the organ inside the human head that commands all bodily functions. Sometimes the signals in the brain get mixed up and too many growth messages are sent to the bones. When the bones in the body grow larger than average size, this is called giantism. A real giant, according to the Guinness Book of Records, was Robert Pershing Wadlow, who grew to a height of about 8 feet 11 inches, 2.7 meters tall. His hands were over 12 inches, 32 centimeters long, which is a little longer than a student's 12-inch, 32 centimeter ruler. Zheng Jinlian of China was the tallest woman ever. She measured about 8 feet 2 inches, 2.5 meters. When she was 4 years old, she was over 5 feet, 1.5 meters tall. We often think of big, strong people who use their size and strength to help others as giants. When stories are told about them, their size is exaggerated until people forget that they were once real and just remember them as giants. Giants were blamed for things people didn't understand. For example, the shaking ground of an earthquake might be a giant stomping his feet. Rumbling heard in the sky, thunder, could be a giant laughing. Were the big bones found in the earth, dinosaur bones, a giant's bones? In story and legend, a giant could be taller than a house or bigger than a mountain. An ogre was a very mean giant. It's fun to think about giants and the things they would have in their castles. If you found a very big piece of rope, would you think it was a wick from a giant's candle or a piece of his dental floss? Does a giant have to use a bed sheet to blow his nose? Sometimes other things besides people can grow to be giants. Maybe you've seen a really big pumpkin at a fair. In the Okanagan Valley of Canada, the Zucca melon grows up to 25 feet, 7.6 meters across. It can weigh anywhere from 60 to 180 pounds, 27 to 81 kilograms. That makes the Zucca melon more than 10 times the size of a watermelon you can buy in the store.
Trees in his garden are his alone, he won't share at all. Big feet, big ears, big nose, big eyes, big hands, big toes, big knees, big mouth. Hey, you kids, get out of my garden. Ain't no giant, he's so selfish. Spring and summer won't come again.
garden. A bountiful harvest of corn and ripe melons, pumpkins, red apples, and grapes by the score. But none to the giant, he'll have them no more. Crisp cold air, frost everywhere, little chilly fingers gripping the trees. Sharp and blasting, hail comes rattling, kicking at the slates of the castle bell. Steam wintry wind blowing briskly by, piercing cold where the giant hides. Icy and bleak, covered with snow, the garden shivers in the snapping cold. Wake up, little flowers, sing sweetly, dear birds. Blossom all the trees of the garden. Springtime returns, bringing new life to you. Soon you'll see your new garden. Children